and welcome to the Pivot Leadership Podcast. We're here to explore the intricacies of leadership and explore the science behind it and hopefully learn a few things along the way. I developed the Pivot framework to help change work environments for the better. Pivot uses neurological science to help leaders understand their colleagues and analyse their own feelings and responses. All in all, we aim to enhance mental well-being, improve performance and benefit everyone involved. So what does pivot mean? To pivot, you need to persevere, include, demonstrate value, optimise your teams and build trust. With my guests, we'll unpick these principles and discuss how each one is vital in building strong leaders. On today's episode, we're looking at optimisation. As a leader, it's important to ensure you're making the most of your team so you can work to their fullest potential. Today's guest is an expert in this. Having been an engagement manager for South Wales Police, she now works as a project manager for the National Police Chiefs Council, where they oversee the recruitment, retention and well-being of detectives. She also volunteers on the communication and engagement lead for the International Association of Women in Policing. So without further ado then, my absolute pleasure to welcome Sarah-Jayne Bray to the podcast.
Good morning. Thank you so much for inviting me along.
Oh, that's okay. It's been a long time coming. I've been excited about this collaboration and this is the first step today for sure. So thank you so much for coming. The reason you were kind of on my list to invite in was because I know you work across organisations and you talk a lot about the collaboration side of what you do. And I think for pivot leaders at the moment, that's super, super crucial, particularly because we've been through such a big change in the work environment. And I think you may have already been working in that way to get organisational results prior to COVID. And I think you've probably got a lot that you can teach us about how the new world of work looks and how we can be more fluid. So I'm really keen to kind of tap into that. So the idea of today is to talk about how we make passion contagious through what we do. So I'm really keen to tap into the work that you do as a coach also. But to start with, would you mind just telling us about your career journey so far?
Oh my goodness, of course, no worries at all. It's a very strange journey, I suspect. I started 20 odd years ago now. Obviously, that's a huge shock for anybody who can see me, such as you, Emma, because obviously I look about 25. But I started 20 odd years ago as a typist in Neath Police Station as part of South Wales Police. And I've just had a real charmed career in that I fell into something that I loved. I fell into an organisation and a service that I loved and moved through multiple roles from typist through lots of administration roles, PA and all those kind of things, then on to project management, performance management. And I moved more through that kind of divisional policing, very localised, locally based, right through to then strategic functions, through into communities and partnerships work, and eventually finding my way into corporate governance. And I'm a real corporate governance geek. The world I'm in now, I'm seconded from South Wales. I'm attached to Thames Valley Police, who are a brilliant police force as well. And I work on a national project because sadly, people aren't racing to be detectives at the moment. And we've done some real strong and positive work, I think, in the last 4 or 5 years to really start to make that an attractive pathway again and to work with forces all across the UK on how they can better support people into the pathway of a detective, whilst also then retaining them and ensuring that they're well and capable to do what is a very, very difficult job. So I am so fortunate, Emma. I get to work with amazing people every single day from across the whole of the UK, of people who are really passionate about the people who work with them, the communities that they serve, and working really hard to make a difference. So I'm just really blessed with it, really. You know, it'd be nice to be on £5 million a year. It's public sector, of course, but, you know, I'll take my reward elsewhere at the end of days.
Well, you know what? Making passion contagious is the key theme on Pivot Leadership. The reward is, your salary at the end of the day and all the jobs that we do. But if we've got that fire and that passion within us, then we can do great things, right? So I'm already feeling a huge amount of passion through your career journey. And I can just see it on your face now. I mean, I'm not sure the listeners will be able to see your face, but I'm feeling that passion. So really want to help leaders today think about how they can make that a reality in their role and with their teams if we can. So we're going to tap into some of your secrets around that because that's quite a long career so far.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you've got a long way to go yet. But, it's got longevity. It's had a lot of kind of diversion, you've changed in paths a few times there. How has your passion stayed alive? Because I think there's a lot of people feeling spent in the workplace at the moment.
I think it's because I feel like I've had about 8 different careers in one organisation in South Wales. I moved sort of disciplines so much. I never pinned myself down. I think early doors in my career, there was a kind of discussion to you need to go into HR, or you need to go into finance, or you need to go into legal, and kind of specialise in something, when my passion has always been either our communities and the people within them, and latterly the people within our organisation, and how I can best serve them. And so I think my passion comes from being able to be a jack of all trades and just actually relying on my own personal skill set to problem solve and fill gaps, which has, allowed me to have that real varied career, but also has ensured I'm a big fan of, value-based leadership. I know exactly what I stand for. And the minute something I'm doing doesn't align with those, I know I got to move on. I got to change. I got to dip into something else. And I've been really lucky through that time that I've had breadth and scope to do that.
Mm. Wow. And that in itself is sort of entrepreneurial within your own role, right? So understanding what you're about and then pivoting within that to make the changes that you need to keep your passion alive. So in your work then, how do you optimise your team's outputs, the teams that you work with and that you touch on?
Okay, so in my current role, I'm in a very collaborative role at the moment. So program managing across all 43 forces, I don't necessarily have a team that I lead in terms of line management as I would have traditionally, but I do have an absolute army of volunteers who I can support and encourage and direct where necessary, and we're able to work together for a cause. So what I think is, for me, the key thing that I have always focused on, it's easy to say I'm a people person, and I clearly am. I'm very excitable around people. But I did my postgrad on collaborative leadership, which I did probably in my early 30s. And it was a real wake up moment for me. I'd worked in communities and partnerships. I'd stepped away from that into a strategic function. And suddenly, understanding more about collaborative leadership really opened doors for me. And I think it is a real underutilized area of business that we just don't teach leaders, because not everybody is good at that partnership and collaborative working. And we often think of that collaborative leadership as being outwards, when actually it's internal too, and it's how we engage our teams. And so for me, I've always followed the key principles of a collaborative leadership model where, big one, everybody knows what I stand for. I talk about my values, I talk about where we're going, I talk about my vision, and create that shared sense of purpose so that everybody knows where the line is with me, knows what fires me up, and in turn knows what fires them up, and how we link that to a common purpose. Linking that then to an agreed plan of action, rather than it being Bray's view of the world, being able to say, right, together, this is where we want to go, how do we get there? And I've always been quite focused on products rather than tasks. What are our outcomes against anything? Then really recognizing skill sets in individuals. We can't do it all alone. And actually, if we want to enact any change, be it an organizational change, be it a product change, be it a directional change, it has to be with other people. So recognizing what skill sets you've got in your team and who's best to take what. Shared decision making is really key as well. You'll hear, no doubt, from leaders who have worked through change and turmoil over the last couple of years. And I think people feel the change is happening to them because we've lost sight of actually engaging our workforce at every point on how we are changing direction or how we are working towards those outcomes. So that shared decision making, helping people feel that they are part of something rather than something that the organisation does to them, I guess. When in the collaborative sphere as well, in the way I'm working at the moment, I've got a lot of really senior leaders, all with very different areas of business, different forces, different mindsets on what we might need to do. And so being quite brave to be able to surface and manage any conflict, which again, I'm quite lucky that it's easy for me to do because I'm quite personable and I'm not afraid of winning people around, I guess, quite a lot of the time. But how you manage that possible conflict between quite a lot of strong leaders. And for me, you mentioned I come from, I've done a lot of work on engagement. That consistent and ongoing two-way engagement Absolutely vital at all times. We get confused, we talk about engagement, and people think what I hear a lot of leaders do is one-way communication rather than two-way engagement. And again, just keeping that collaborative mindset that we're all in this together, and being, as a leader, your part of that is to provide that purpose, provide that clarity, help chivvy people through that plan of action, hold people accountable when necessary, surface any of that conflict, but more importantly, be that person who is consistent for them through the work that you are doing. And I think that's probably, as I said, from that collaborative point of view, that's very much my true north of how I take that work forward.
Yeah, I can see that you're like a really shining light, bright light with that. And your personality type and how you show up, I guess, really lends to all of those great things for collaboration. Have you got any kind of tips about managing your energy around that? Because some of our listeners will be less on the people person scale of things, but they're still great leaders. It's just collaboration might not come as easy for them, or that relationship build. Is there anything that you can kind of share with those leaders to help them to get on this path that you're on, in terms of their actions or behaviours, or maybe just thinking about how they would go about it?
Of course, people get nervous about engagement and thinking, if I'm not a people person, I can't engage effectively. Whereas I've worked with amazing engagement leaders who perhaps aren't those as strong in their interpersonal skills. And again, I think for me is recognizing the core principles of what you need to do, outlining that purpose with regular one-to-one and team meetings and repeating it over and over again. When you're communicating, listening skills are
Yeah.
so vital, an art that lots of us have lost, and is something that you have to keep reskilling in. Recognizing people and recognizing the value they bring in, the successes that they're having, or just showing up every day. That consistent recognition of individuals, be it a short thank you letter, be it a little email. And finally, the thing that no matter your interpersonal skills are strong, whether you're a core engager, looking after people, really focusing on people's well-being, even if you're not naturally in that space where you're comfortable engaging. If you know yourself, know your staff, know your stuff, they tend to really warm to you. I've had lots of leaders like that who perhaps aren't the warm, cute, fluffy types, but actually when things have hit the wall or things have gone wrong, they've been the ones checking in. Are you okay? What do you need from me? How can I support you? So probably not one big tip there, I'm afraid, but there's a couple of things there that hopefully will help.
No, I love that. What was it? Know yourself, know your
Oh,
stuff. What was that again?
know yourself, know your staff, know your stuff. So I talk about this to future leaders quite a lot. I know who I am. It took me a long time to know my values, long time to know my worth, but I'm really comfortable in what those are now. I tend to know what I'm talking about in my role, in what I'm in charge of. I do a lot of time reading. People say to me, how do you know all this? Because I spend a lot of time reading things and making sure I'm over my brief. And knowing your staff is vital. Just knowing what's going on in their lives, who they are as people, what makes them tick, what makes them, there's brilliant things called wellness support plans, which you can get from Mind, the charity, and some other organisations that really help you give your staff tools so they can share with you how they like to work, what optimizes them in the workplace, and how you can support them in that. So, yeah, know yourself, know your staff, know your stuff.
Love that. Love that. And I know leaders can take that away with them. That's brilliant. So, as a dedicated coach and mentor, then in the role that you do, how do you help people realize their full potential when you're working with them? So, remotely or hybrid, what is it about you that really helps them be optimized when they're in a space with you?
I think despite being a talker, I spend a lot of time on receive, not always on transmit. I'm a good listener, and I think I'm pretty good at understanding where people are looking to go. It's interesting because I am often a very poor coach, but a better mentor. And I've got a colleague who is a far better coach than she is a mentor. And we tend to swap coachees between us. So she's very good. If you have no idea what you want to do and no idea where you're going next or any of that, she's the one you want to talk to because she will help tease out where you're looking to go. If you know where you're going, but you just can't get through those barriers and you just can't fix stuff, she'll send them to me. I'm very good at being able to signpost people to recognize the skills within themselves and the tools that they have available to them to move to the next steps. And I think for me as a coach, it's focusing on that listening. It's asking those, being bold in the questions you ask, not being afraid to call people out sometimes on the things that get in their way. And I do a lot of confidence coaching because as someone who really struggled internally with confidence for a long time, I've done a lot of work on myself around that. And again, in that coaching space, showing people the confidence is not a feeling, it's an action.
Mm,
Taking that step forward, whether you were ready or not, nobody's ever ready for anything, I think, that truly hits them. And
yeah.
so, that is the thing for me. Listening, creating that safe space, not being afraid to call people out if they need it, and actually pushing them into action. If you've had 3 sessions with me and you still haven't taken that first move forward, we're unlikely to go to a fourth. It's on you.
Yeah. I really relate to that because I'm a 3-session coach girl. That's my methodology too. But I really like what you talked about there around the confidence. I think that's really interesting because on the Pivot program, we get to value, and then the next class, if you like, is optimisation. So after we understand our value and we work on confidence being a state, not a trait. So we're not, it's not stuck. We can do something with confidence if we understand the value that we're standing on, and then how we can demonstrate that through our work and put words to that or a feeling to that. And then when we're in Optimise, we start talking about then the coaching to optimize people to bring that through. So you've just kind of demonstrated that brilliantly for me there. But also focusing on the listening. We focus a lot on questioning in coaching. How do we ask the right questions at the right time to get the right results? But it's a nice reminder there for us to take a step back and think, it's the listening first, isn't it, for the great question? That's for all of us as coaches and managers to think about.
Absolutely. And you've touched upon something there that was far harder than finding confidence, and that was finding my worth.
Mm,
I don't know if that's a female thing, Emma, or maybe a functioning anxiety thing. I don't know. It took me a long time to realise my worth. I think it might be easier in private sector where perhaps your promotions are dependent on it and your next pay and your performance development and things. In public sector, there's a lot of public service motivation that goes into the job, and you give an awful lot more than you're likely to get back, in theory, in terms of your time and your effort. And it took me a long time to really know my worth and to start fighting for it in terms of not necessarily pay or rank or any of that, but certainly in terms of my voice and in terms of speaking up around the table or being the person to step forward and say what needs to be said. It took me a long time to get to that state of knowing that worth. And I think that's a huge part of getting where you need to be in terms of your confidence.
yeah. And overcoming that feedback loop where we don't always speak up and say the things we want to say in meetings, public arena, because of all of that societal impact on us around having those views. And interestingly, you talked there about being a female, which I think could be another podcast in itself. So we'll talk about that one in more depth again. But I know you're really dedicated to equality, diversity, inclusion in the workplace. Why do you think this is so important to create an environment that ensures dignity and respect for all?
Uh, I think the older I get, the angrier I get about things. I really do. And there are so many things I could easily set fire to. And our approach around equality and diversity and inclusion really frustrates me. And certainly the narrative that you see around this externally at the moment, as if this isn't something that's important, that doesn't serve us all. We should all be able to turn up into the workplace as our true selves, living our best lives, so that you can optimize what you get out of people
Yeah,
and that they can give their absolute utmost. As policing is a very tricky space at the moment in terms of internal culture. I've worked long and hard on sexual misconduct and been very vocal around internal trust and confidence issue, and I've been fortunate to work with amazing people around that. And the organisation and the service is certainly open to those discussions. But the external narrative, I think, around policing, particularly where you turn up and you are just a robot in a piece of kit, that turns up and keeps people safe as just one singular job, is not it. We police complex communities made up of the breadth and the wealth of the world within them, all who have different needs, all who have different views on how the world is run, and all who deserve support. No one is more deserving of our support. Everybody within our community are absolutely deserving of our help. And I think it's absolutely key that starts internally, that we treat each other with dignity and respect every single day, because then that translates itself into how we treat our communities and the people we serve each and every day. Policing is run on public confidence. Without that public confidence, we cannot do what we need to do. And that public confidence is absolutely paramount against anything else that we may discuss or do or talk about. And so for me, it is essential, particularly in public sector, that we are absolutely alive to how we move through the world with that empathy, that kindness, treating everybody with dignity and respect.
Yeah. And that's a hard one to police, right? So,
Yeah, oh my goodness. Oh my
you
goodness.
know, on the inclusion module on the Pivot program, we talk, I talk a lot about, this comes from my heart, about changing the notion of culture to community at work. Because when we think about culture, and if you think about the police, and I'm being very simplistic here, and I know it's not this simple, but it's a good one to kind of use as reference. Like you say, we show up, we put on the uniform, this is who we are. That is very much culture. But if we're thinking about it from a community perspective in terms of how we're operating within that organisation, that's a very different field to showing up in our uniform and all looking the same and all acting in a way that we think we should be acting, isn't it? So that's really super powerful. And how, in reality, coming back to your job around bringing this talent in, the detectives in, I know that's a big part of your role and you've kind of moved the dial on that quite a lot. How is that actually all going in reality? Because I talk a lot about the truth zone. When I go into organisations, they ask me to talk, we want to do a leadership programme. This is where we're at. This is what the data we know about our organisation. Now, can you do some skills development to enhance that and, change the dial on that? And I say, that's fine, but can we really look at what your promise is to your employees and the communities you serve versus the lived experience? And then we've got this truth zone that sits in the middle. And actually, what is that really like? And you've got to be quite brave and bold to go there to understand that. And then I can build programs to help that truth zone.
Absolutely.
So how is it going? How is that going from your perspective in terms of the objectives you've been trying to meet?
It starts with the very basics. So when we first started looking at this work, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, there were very few forces who were absolutely confident in how many detectives they had. So you might have people who had the label of detective but weren't qualified detectives, because they go through quite a stringent qualification process to become a detective, and weren't really able to pin people who had done that qualification and perhaps were in a role that was a detective or an investigator role, or who had moved on into something else. That was the real big problem in the very beginning. And there was a report that came out to say we had a 22% vacancy factor across all detectives, which really sparked this work. That vacancy factor now, we're confident it's down to around, I think at the latest data, 8%. So in the last couple of years, we've really smashed through that by understanding the data set, creating simpler pathways for people to become a detective. There's a whole array of pathways. And we've also created newer pathways, so you can just come in to the organisation as a detective. You can go in as direct entry. So creating those pathways. But what was clear when we started to understand that vacancy factor is that actually it wasn't really about the recruitment. It was about the retention, and it was about the well-being. So for me, we now have far more investigators in policing than we have had, I daren't say ever than before, because I'm not sure what the numbers, we don't really know data-wise what the number were like 15 years ago. But certainly for the last 5 years, and I'd probably say for a long, long time, we've got far more dedicated detectives who, investigate serious, complex crimes than we've ever had. Or we've certainly had for a long, long time. My issue now is, how do I retain them? How do I keep them? And how do I keep them well? How do forces ensure that they're kept well? There's a really negative story to tell about becoming a detective, in that when you look at it of why we have these issues, they have to go through a very difficult exam, which is similar to the sergeant's exam, where is the next rank up. So if you're going to sit an exam, you may as well go for the one that's going to give you more money and more responsibility, in 12 months' time. So it's a specific exam. They have to build a portfolio over a period of time to evidence that they're able to investigate these serious and complex crimes. That takes a huge amount of work and effort in terms of their work-life balance, being able to juggle ongoing crimes at the same time, and being dedicated in the workplace through all that. Then we know that they are at the highest risk of PTSD, anxiety, stress, depression, because of the nature of those serious complex crimes. We're talking rape, we're talking child sexual abuse, we're talking all those different things, and murders, homicides, all these things, which have an effect on people, of course, because we're all human. And then, so you do all our hard work, you're at greater risk of all these awful things, and then actually we pay them less and give them less rest days than some of their response colleagues because they don't have the same shift allowance and they don't necessarily have the same number of rest days because they're not on the same shifts. And so, you paint that picture and go, my goodness, why would anybody become an investigator? So you've really got to look at, okay, so what do we add in here? We need to add in continuous professional development so they know that they are absolutely highly trained to deal with whatever comes their way. We need to look at that pay parity issue. And we've got things like targeted variable payments. So we encourage enforcers to pay so that the detectives are on a par with their other colleagues. We're also looking at meaningful wellbeing interventions. And by that, I mean, there's a place for things like sleep and nutrition and that kind of stuff. That's great. That's not fixing PTSD. That's not fixing secondary trauma. And so we've got an academic reference group that trawl through amazing research that is underway by many, many academic colleagues across the UK and internationally indeed, looking at what are the game changers here. And I think many leaders sat maybe listening to this will, when you do a wellbeing strategy, will go to the softer things that are vital to make an attractive workplace. But actually, what we know from our investigators and the academic research, the game changers around wellbeing are not yoga and running clubs, it's demand management, prioritizing and managing their demand of what their workload is. It's looking at ensuring they have time away from the office, that they're not on 24/7, and actually when they step away, someone else is picking up what they should be doing. It's about continuous professional development so they feel invested in, that they feel like someone is caring for what they do, that they are kind of supported in terms of reward and recognition, that it takes an awful lot out of you, this public service motivation. And all we need to do sometimes is say, thank you so much. I appreciate what you do for this job and for your communities. It doesn't have to be the KPMs and the honours and all that kind of stuff. Something as simple as a thank you goes a long way. And finally, the biggest game changer, and if I could wave a magic wand across all of policing and probably most organisations, is those meaningful one-to-ones with empowered supervisors who understand the signs, understand what true well-being looks like, that know their staff, know their stuff, know themselves,
Yeah.
and can have those meaningful one-to-ones that actually can pull levers for people and make things better for them. And we spend a lot of time, I'm going to be really, this is probably too blunt, however I say it a lot, it feels sometimes that we gaslight people into thinking, well, their lack of resilience is their fault. This whole idea of here's all this mega work in really complex areas with huge pressures, huge threat, risk, and harm around it, in very, very visible, external pressures like we've never seen before with social media and the press and the media and all these other things. So I know you're stressed, but have you tried sleeping?
Yeah.
Have you eaten an apple today? Have you
Yeah. Or
stretched?
do you know how to manage your resilience? Is this your resilience playing out rather than actually the reality of what your world is looking like? Yeah, I end and that is gaslighting. I absolutely get that.
It's probably an unfair phrase in one way because gaslighting is a very serious thing in terms of violence against women and girls and so on. But it feels like that kind of we're trying to make it their problem when actually it's our organisational problem.
Yeah, it's about being able to master that energy, but also the environment enabling us to do that. And, I'm a big advocate, the bean bags and the slides don't work. They were novel at the time because the brain likes novelty. But what we actually really need is a certain level of clarity about what's expected of us. And is that even, is that a reality? Can we do that? Other options for me within this on how I can work and do it. And you were talking about, being able to get away from the office, that kind of thing. So I really, really understood that in terms of the relationship with energy there. Protecting my reputation by not overloading me and setting me up to fail. I mean, that's massive for the brain. And then this equity, if I'm not okay, it's all right for me to say, okay, that doesn't change the power balance or tell me I'm bad at what I do. I just need optimizing at the moment. And what you're talking about there is looking at demands and being realistic about that.
It's huge stigma around that. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're right there. That stigma around well-being and lack of well-being or mental ill health particularly is a huge issue that you just need more people talking about it, don't you? We need to be far more open.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you say, having leaders who can do meaningful work in that space with people.
Yeah,
definitely. Oh, I've just so totally enjoyed this chat so much.
Likewise.
We could keep going, I think, but I want to bring it to a close because I know you're super busy. So can you just give us a last bit of advice on helping leaders who want to really optimise their team's potential?
Oh, there's so many I think that we've touched upon, but I think values and purpose, really looking at how you articulate your purpose and your values and the standards expected every single day in the most engaging way possible. But people they cannot be at their full potential in the workplace and give you everything if they don't know where they're going or why they're doing it. And I think we don't really reflect enough in terms of how we win hearts and minds in bringing people onto the journey with us. Why are they getting on our bus, I think? And I think going back to that know yourself, know your stuff, and your stuff, knowing your staff will help you know how to bring them onto that bus. And I think in this hybrid working, we focus a lot on tasks. I'd be focusing on those outcomes, that output, that productivity. When people know the purpose and they know the things that they have to work towards and deliver on and managing those effectively, it just revolutionizes the way they work. And the final thing, as I said, that magic wand is those engaged one-to-ones. Even if you are not that person who feels comfortable having those one-to-one discussions, knowing how to have brave conversations with people, knowing how to have open conversations with people is not just good for people's well-being or good for their productivity. They're career-saving conversations quite a lot of the time, and making sure people are behaving as they should and doing what they should and performing as they should. So I think, really upskilling yourself in terms of how you diarise, hold, and manage those one-to-ones are key.
Yeah, crucial conversations.
Yeah.
Sarah-Jayne, it's been a pleasure. Can you please just tell our listeners where they can find out more about you?
Oh my goodness. Well, I've gone hopeless. One of my New Year's resolutions is to be less time on social media. But I am on LinkedIn. They're very welcome to find me there. Sarah-Jayne Bray. I'm on Twitter. I think I'm at SJBray83 on there. And Emma, if there's anything where you want to put my email address, they are very welcome to get in touch with me via my email as well. I'm very open to engaging with anybody and discussing ideas and talking about anything they think may be useful that I've shared today.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much. I know the community will love that. And from my personal perspective, you are an ultimate pivot leader. Thank you so much.
You're so kind. It's been such a pleasure. And we are definitely getting that coffee in soon.